Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Full screen, lovely.
Okay, so I've called it a very brief introduction because I was just doing an introduction to Hempcrete this morning at CSM, and it was an hour with Q&A. So this is going to be a very, very quick version of the same presentation. So for those of you that I haven't met, my name's Alex Sparrow, and I have a company called UK Hempcrete, and we specialise in constructing the structural and thermal envelope of buildings from bio-based materials. Hempcrete is what we're known for, but we use a range of different, mainly bio-based materials, often from waste streams, and often carbon sequestering, usually carbon sequestering. And compared to a lot of the things that you guys are involved in, it can seem quite low tech, I imagine. But yeah. So if we just focus on hemp for a second, this is the raw material that we're working with. So as many of you are aware, that the industrial hemp plant is Cannabis sativa, and it's a strain that's been bred to have very low levels of THC, which is the main psychotropic compound, and that's as a way to get around various countries' legislation on recreational drugs. So in the UK, industrial hemp has been grown since 1992 under license from the government, various places around the country, and the varieties we grow here, the hemp plant has lots and lots of applications of its various parts of the plant, but mainly in the UK we grow fibre varieties. So we extracting the first process is to decorticate the stem. So we're taking the bast fibre from around the outside of the stalk, which is then baled and goes off to a range of different applications, industrial applications, including as reinforcing fibre in bioplastics. And then the bit of the stalk that I'm interested in for my application is the woody cellulose core of the stalk. And the hemp plant, or the variety that we use here in the UK, grows about 4 meters in 3 to 4 months, and it's a very tall, thin plant with all its leaves and branches at the top. So the way that it holds itself up is by very quickly laying down this very hard woody cellulose stem, which has a similar density to softwood, and it does that by absorbing, relative to other biomass, a huge amount of atmospheric CO2 to create this carbon-rich stem. And the woody stem, which contains all the CO2 that's been sequestered by the plant, is the bit that we then chop up and use as a bioaggregate in Hempcrete. So we make Hempcrete by taking that raw biomass, that raw aggregate, and mixing it with a building lime or formulated lime binder, which is, there are various commercial recipes for the binder available on the market, but they're either a very hydraulic, naturally occurring lime, or they're a formulated lime, so with air limes mixed with additives, pozzolans, to create something that gives it a hydraulic set. So we wet mix it, and then the material is a kind of loose fill material that can be placed in any shaped void and will set and go really hard and hold its own shape. Okay, so that's how it, when we mix it, that's what it looks like. So it's a kind of damp solid rather than a pouring consistency. What else do you need to know about it? So you can think of it as a carbon sequestering, bio-based, renewable, vapor open insulation and walling material. that also has thermal mass because it's a sort of moderate density material because of the lime in the binder. So in comparison to other insulations, Hempcrete is much more dense, much less insulating, but compared to lightweight insulations, it has a much better thermal performance because it's, as well as holding air trapped in the material to insulate, it's also able to store heat in the material, dissipates really slowly throughout the material, and then radiates out when the heat source has disappeared. It also does some quite interesting things with moisture, humidity, next to especially importantly in the internal environment. So because the cellular structure of the hemp stalk is really all evolved to get as much moisture as possible from the ground up this 4-meter stem to the top of the plant as quickly as possible, then the sort of microscopic pore structure of the hemp shiv, the woody stalk, combined with the vapor openness of the lime binder, means that when there's the relative humidity is high inside, instead of in a house that's finished with a gypsum plaster and impermeable paints, if you're boiling a pan on the stove, you might get a sheen of condensation forming on the wall. But because Hempcrete walls are finished with a lime plaster and it's vapor open, the wall actually absorbs moisture into the surface of the wall. It condenses in the pores of the hemp plant. And then when the relative humidity drops, that moisture is released out again. So it's sort of passively buffering changes in humidity and keeping the internal space, the relative humidity in the internal space between 40 and 60%, which is obviously good for people's health and inhibiting viral and bacterial growth and keeping the inside of the property healthy. So there's 4 main ways of using Hempcrete. The top 2 are both about wet mixing the material and casting it on site. It's non-load bearing, so there's always a structural frame. And that Hempcrete can either be mixed and tipped into formwork, or it can be spray applied with an adapted render pump. Both of those methods create a really thermally efficient building because you're essentially creating the whole envelope of the building from one piece of material. So it's very easy to eliminate thermal bridging. You've got a single piece of material to make airtight with a lime render on the outside of the building. Except obviously where you've got a junction with an opening, or with the roof if you're using different insulation in the roof. The one downside of casting it on site is that there's a long drying time of the wall once you've made it, and that's kind of climate dependent. So if your project gets pushed back and you're casting later in the year, then that can cause delays on site, which makes it more or less unsuitable for commercial scale projects. So there are now some pre-cast options available, cast blocks of Hempcrete and structural panel systems that can be assembled on site.
Alex,
Yeah.
you've already done your 7 minutes. I'm going to give you 2 more minutes.
Okay, so you can use it in all elements of the building: floors, walls, and roof insulation. Really simple. This is it's a really flexible material, and there are lots of different ways of detailing it in the building. But in its simplest form, there's a structural timber frame. In domestic contexts, that's usually timber frame with the Hempcrete cast around it to form a monolithic wall, which is your insulation in walling all-in-one element. As I said, we use it alongside lots of other bio-based and natural insulation products. This is just to give you a flavour of the sort of things we build. The finish is usually a lime render externally, but you can just as easily have timber cladding, masonry cladding built with a lime mortar. obviously complementary materials in the roof. We tend to go for the natural, local option whenever possible. We also do a lot of retrofitting of historic buildings, traditionally constructed buildings. That's a mixture of internal shots. So the internal finish is usually lime or clay plaster. That is only one of those buildings with anything to do with me, but that's just to give you a flavour of the commercial scale up, which has been happening over the last 21 years that we've been building with Hempcrete in this country. I've talked about most of those already, but that's where my client base come from. So we're kind of at the early adopter stage, really, and we're just tackling how to scale up very rapidly in response to the sort of climate emergency. And now suddenly everybody's realised that local supply chains might be better than global supply chains. So that's ticking another box for us. That's it. Sorry, went over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. Although I know a lot about it, it's always lovely to hear it over and over again.
Iris has been working with Hempcrete longer than I have, haven't you?
Yeah, but I haven't actually been building houses. I've just been giving grants to people to use it. Questions from people?
I have a question. I'm back and I have a question.